Welcome to the Central Region Advisory Council. My name is Brock McMillan. I'm the chair of this committee. It's December 5th at 6:00 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person, as you can see, and it's also being streamed online. We have 6 members of the RAC present in person, and we have 3 members of the RAC present online. This is a public forum allowing everyone to express their opinions and proposals on management of wildlife in our state. The RAC considers your ideas, opinions, and proposals and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for the state. We all have our ideas and opinions of what's best for wildlife in the state, and we all approach this with tremendous emotion and passion. I encourage everyone to express their opinion. We want to hear it. I encourage everybody to respect the others' opinions in the room. At this time, I will call roll to see who is here. Mike Christensen.
Mike Christensen at large.
Let's just have them, is that okay if they just welcome? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Eric Reed, BLM.
John Ziegler, non-consumptive.
Kellen Heyer, agriculture.
Josh Greenhall, a sportsman.
Then we'll go online. We have Jim Schuler, then Braden, and then Josh. Go ahead, Jim.
Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Braden Shepard, agriculture.
Joshua Leonard, sportsman's rep.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize members from UDWR that are here. Those include Darren DeBloy from the Game Mammals Program Coordinator, Daniel Salee, the Box Elder District Biologist, and Wyatt Bubak, the Law Enforcement Section Chief. I'd also like to welcome the public that are attending this meeting and that are watching on YouTube. Those that are attending will have the opportunity to ask questions and make comments on the proposals that are on the agenda. Those that are watching will not. Those presentations were provided in advance. You had an opportunity to make comments online. If you would like to make a comment during this meeting, you need to fill out one of these cards. We already have several, but if you haven't done so and you'd like to comment, please do so. Oh, I'd also like to recognize Gary Nielsen from the Wildlife Board in the audience here today. Appreciate him attending this meeting. At this time, I'll call for approval of the agenda and minutes. Or a motion.
So moved.
Was that Jim online? Okay, Jim made a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. And Braden, and then Josh. Okay, everybody have their hand up, unanimous. Thank you very much. At this time, I will give a brief summary of what happened at the last board meeting. There was a motion to accept the mandatory harvest survey amendments as presented by the division, and that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the pronghorn augmentation sites as presented by the division. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to reject the division's proposal as presented on the research proposal and ask the Mule Deer Committee to discuss these recommendations and bring it forth next year. Also ask the committee to include a research project, and that motion passed 4-1. There was a motion to accept the division proposal as accepted to allow 1-power scopes or red dot scopes. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendations and to ask the division to prepare an annual report on how the buyout hour dollars are spent. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendation to remove public access requirement from LOAs as presented. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendation to establish a limited entry draw for LOA lands as presented. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendation to issue general seasonal landowner permits on private property, allowing up to 10% above the total number of unit permits that could be issued. That motion failed for lack of a second. There was then a motion to accept the division's recommendation to issue general seasonal landowner permits on private property, but reduce the percentage to 6% above the total number of unit permits that could be issued over the counter. And that motion passed unanimously. Its recommendations as presented by the division and ask the division to report on units 4, 5, and 6. That motion passed 4 with 1 recusal from Brett Solomon. And then there was a motion to accept the division's recommendation to place the following on Landowner Association Advisory Committee, sportsmen's representatives, Troy Justison and Donnie Hunter, landowner representatives, Dale Christiansen and Andy Monroe, agricultural representative Stephen Tew, at-large representative Greg Wilding, and RAC member representative Scott Flannery. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division's Deep Creek Elk Unit recommendation as presented, and that motion passed unanimously. Still going. There was a motion, the Book Cliffs Little Creek South Bison Hunt variance request. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendation as presented. That passed unanimously. And there was a motion on the corrections to approve, prohibit, and control list changes. There was a motion to accept the division's recommendation as presented, and that motion passed unanimously. And that's all I have on the Wildlife Board. I'll now turn the time over to Jason to provide a regional update.
Thanks, Brock. I appreciate that. If you remember in our last meeting, last month, I gave a really brief update because we had a lot of stuff on the docket. So I'm going to try to give a semi-brief update this go around, but there's been a lot of stuff that have piled up over the last couple of months, so bear with me on this. In our wildlife section, we hadn't talked about the opening weekend deer check stations yet. They were a little bit slower in our region than usual, and that's been talked about quite a bit through other sources as well. We're also in the middle of our postseason deer classifications, and then we're starting to do some deer captures coming up in the next couple of weeks. And again, if there's anybody on the RAC that would like to get on those deer captures or elk captures, let us know. We'd love to take you out there and get you with those animals. And then even though we don't have a lot of snow coming in yet, we've had a little here and there, but we're starting to capture nuisance turkeys and get them transplanted throughout the region to transplant sites where we don't have a lot or we want to bolster a flock out there. In our aquatic section, we're still dealing with some of the damage that took place several years ago, and we had a large fire complex on the Nebo and kind of up the Diamond Fork and that whole area up in there. On Nebo Creek, they've repaired a fish barrier that was damaged during some high flows. Even now, we're still experiencing some high flows and sheet erosion off into those creeks. And last year, it blew out one of our fish barriers, and so they were able to get in the stream and repair that. Our kokanee, you may have heard we had a reduced egg take at Strawberry Reservoir this year. And so they put some effort into Fish Lake, collecting some eggs from the kokanee down at Fish Lake, and they had some successful initial efforts there. But we do have some of the silver kokanees that they counted this year, and it's looking encouraging for next year. So we're hopeful for that. Had really high flows directly following the flood and kind of washed a lot of those out. So we're really excited to see some of these native species coming back in. In our habitat section, they've been super busy. Fall is probably one of their busiest times of the year when they are out on the landscape implementing habitat projects. Something we're really excited about is the South Manti habitat restoration. Completed approximately 1,000 acres of mule deer summer range on the South Manti this year, including some cut and pile work and 400 acres of prescribed burn. And we've got several years worth of work scheduled and planned for the South Manti unit down there. So we're really excited about that and excited for our partners down there on the Ranger District. Stansbury Mountains, we flew some more guzzlers into some remote locations in there with a helicopter, primarily for bighorn sheep and mule deer. Over the last several months, they've planted over 34,000 shrub seedlings on many of our WMAs and some on the BLM and Forest Service as well. So we're trying to work high on the summer range for mule deer, and then we're also working low on the winter range for some of those things to try to bolster both of those areas. And then a whole bunch of in-stream erosion control structures, the beaver dam analogs is what they call them, kind of to mimic what a beaver dam would do, a natural beaver dam. So we've done a lot of work to on our rivers to stop the sedimentation or downstream of those rivers. In our outreach section, they were super busy this fall, holding pheasant hunts. We partnered with SFW on the Walsburg WMA this year, had 40 hunters and 100 roosters. We appreciate the support from SFW on that. Lots of hunting seminars, waterfowl, game processing, fall turkey hunting, pheasant hunting. Like if there was something that had to do with hunting, our outreach section was putting on a seminar for it this year. A lot of those you can find more information on. If you're interested next year, that'll be online. So we encourage you to look for that, and I'll try to share that with the group if anybody's interested in any of those seminars. And then next year, something we're excited about also is our dedicated hunter timesheets are going to be going digital. So everything will be online. Hopefully simplify and quicken the process for getting your hours recorded. Right now in the back, there's just stacks and stacks of timesheets that our folks have to go through. So this process is really going to simplify that. We're excited about that. And then in the law enforcement section, of course, as you can imagine, the fall is super busy for them. Lots of UTIP calls coming in along the Wasatch Front that our officers respond to on a daily basis. We have a K-9 officer, James Thomas. He's been deployed a lot. His K-9 is Kip. He's been out on multiple cases throughout the region for lots of different reasons. He was trained primarily for wildlife, but he also assists here and there with county and local police departments on other types of actions as well. And very valuable to have him in our region. We're happy for that. And then one of the other things that seems to be a problem that we've run into this year is we've been finding issue with people hunting on the extended archery permits, hunting outside the current open boundaries. For some reason, we've seen a little spike in that this year. So if you are going to go hunt extended archery, make sure you know when and where you're going to be so that you don't find yourself in a pickle, I guess. With that, are there any questions from any of the RAC members? Okay, like I said, just let me know if you want to get out and get on some of these wildlife captures. We'd love to have you out there. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I'd add to that. If you can't make it when they're doing them here in the Central Region, they're going the whole month. So they're happening in other regions right now. So if you're willing to travel, you could go any day. Okay. Our first agenda item, the Utah Black Bear Management Plan Revision and Rule R657-33. Darren, I don't know if you want to give any additional information or a brief.
Yeah, I'll be really brief. I think I presented a lot of just data on kind of the status of bears, over the last year. So if any questions arise on that, I'm happy to answer them. And then really, we're just asking for a couple of changes. One is a change to the rule to allow us to facilitate something that the board voted on last year, which is to allow a person to draw a bear tag and then take a mandatory orientation class after. And then the second is a tweak to the plan that we overlooked when we changed the plan last round. It's just the plan requires a statewide roll up. And the intent of the Black Bear Committee when we made changes to the plan was to allow district biologists to make district by district unit by unit decisions. And so that statewide roll-up was something that wasn't compliant with that. So that's really it tonight.
Thank you, Darren. Questions for Darren? I have one, Darren. I was shocked that the female to male ratio is only 1.15 to 1.
Yeah.
How confident are you in that number?
It's based on animals treed. So it's as good as people can identify bears in the tree when they're treeing them. So that's from our pursuit data.
So and I'm not a bear hunter. There's someone
Right.
here. Are both sexes treat equally easily? I heard that like a big boar never goes up a tree.
That's my understanding too.
Yeah, I've got a couple quick questions for you, Darren.
Sure.
The presentation you gave had population data through 2020.
Mhm.
Why can't we have information from more recent than that?
So the population estimate is it's based on hunter harvest and on bears that are harvested and their ages at harvest. And so real simplified explanation of it is that if you have a 5-year-old bear that was taken this year, we assume that he was 4 years old on the unit the year before, 3 years old the year before. And you do that, if you do that with an entire year's harvest, and then add those to the previous year's ages, et cetera, back through time, that relies on us assuming that people are harvesting bears at the rate that they occur in the population. Since it's illegal to take cubs and people tend not to take yearlings because they're smaller, we don't estimate those last two. And so in order to get a full cohort estimate, you're at least 2 years in the past because of those 3-year-olds have to go to 2 to 1, and that's when you get your estimate. So that's why it's a lag, and it's also why we don't use it in the plan as a metric to make permit recommendations.
So the data that you had presented showed that there was a pretty good drop in estimated bear population between 2018 and 2020.
Yeah,
And you're attributing that to drought?
I think drought. We have issued a lot more bear permits according to the plan guidelines, and so. But I think it's primarily drought that's driving that. We've had massed failures in the fall, acorns, and our biggest bear populations are in the southern part of the state. So we think that's what's driving that.
Your total mortality line included the sport harvest numbers, right?
Right.
So the harvest, as I understand it, sport harvest in 2022 was 423 bears. And in 2023 was 315. To what do you attribute that 25% drop in harvest?
It's probably from a population decline. I think that's part of it. The other part of it is weather plays a certain amount of I mean, the most effective bear hunters are people who use dogs or hunt over bait. And so probably number one, John, is just a decline, especially on those units that have a lot of bears.
So I guess the question is, why would the DWR endorse continuing with a similar number of tags when they know the population's dropping?
Yeah,
in
the
bear?
board, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
You're good.
So the board did pass, what we've asked is that we manage in 3-year blocks. And so 2 years ago, this will be the 3rd year, the board approved these numbers for 3. So next year we'll be coming back with permit recommendations, and we'll adjust. We take the last 3 years of harvest, look at that in comparison with the plan parameters, and then make recommendations based on that. So we take it 3 years at a time. And for black bears, it makes sense. They're relatively slow reproducers, and so jumping around year to year just doesn't really make sense for bears.
One last question I'll torture you with is
Sure, yeah.
the baiting of bears from May 27 to June 30 for that 34 days, 35 days, whatever. What portion of the total sport harvest is taken by those who bait?
I can get the exact numbers for you, John. I'll pull it up. Memory it's roughly half and half between people who are using dogs and people who are using vape. But let me get the actual numbers for you.
Okay.
I'll pull that out.
All right, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this question comes back to the one earlier about the boar-sow ratio being pretty well even. Is that necessary for a bear population?
No, I mean, it's similar to other species. You know, one boar can service multiple sows. It's not quite, you generally want more boars than you would with like an ungulate population, but they tend to get the job done.
Okay, thank you.
Darren, do we have any current studies, bear studies going on?
We do. Utah State University is doing one actually close here on the Nebo. They're looking at, it's actually a larger, it's a broader one. It's a predator population study. So they're trying multiple methods to look at trying getting better estimates of actual numbers. So obviously, you know, we're estimating males because those tend to be the ones that people focus on. And then we get our females by seeing what people say they treat, and then we add those in. And so that's not the best. I mean, the trend is probably okay, but it's not the best. So they're using things like, they're going to do camera traps. They're doing scat detecting dogs to get DNA. And so we're going to look at several methods and see if there's some stuff we can look. And then we do still collar and visit dens to look at reproduction. Just kind of get a feel for, you know, our bears reproducing regularly, and that ties into the drought question. They've seen a lot lower cub production. If sows don't get the nutrition they need in the fall, a lot of times they'll absorb, even if they're pregnant, they'll just absorb those fetuses and won't have cubs.
Yeah. Do you have an idea about how many colors you have out on bears that are functioning?
Probably 25-ish. Pretty easy. I mean, it's different than a lion's harder. People have to kind of know what they're looking for, but bears are pretty obvious. It's a lot like people. They just you have to be patient and get a good view.
Got it. Thanks.
Got one more question on the, you mentioned that they don't have to take the orientation till after the draw.
Right.
On those who buy the harvest objective permits, do they have to take a orientation before they can purchase a permit?
Yeah. Not before they purchase it, but before they hunt. They have to have that certificate in their possession when they're afield, so they don't have it. And you can download that on your phone too, like you could your license. They have to have it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions for Darren? Any questions from the public? Okay, I'll turn it over to Jason to summarize public comments.
Thanks, Brock. For this, we had 4 votes come in for comments. 3 of them strongly agreed, or 75%, and 1 of them somewhat agreed for 25%. And there were no votes in any other categories. We had 2 comments. The weighted average is 4.75. We had 2 comments made online, and they both revolved around it makes sense to require the orientation course only for those who draw a permit.
Thank you, Jason. Now we'll turn it over to the public for comment. Are there public comments on this item? We'll start with TJ Pace, followed by Garrett Slatkoff.
TJ Pace, Utah.
Oh, wait, before you start, if you're representing yourself, you have 3 minutes. If you're representing an organization, you have 5 minutes. Please stand up, state your name, who you represent, and then provide your comment. Thank you.
TJ Pace, Utah Houndsman Association. We would like to propose a 10% reduction in tags on the Book Cliffs, the Boulder, LaSalle, and San Juan. We'd like to keep some good quality units to provide plenty of opportunity for all sportsmen to harvest a bear. We recognize that tag numbers typically change at the end of a management cycle, but with the data showing that the downward spiral with harvest and depredation, and other than that, we'd support the recommendations.
Thank you, TJ. Garrett?
Garrett Slatkoff, representing the Utah chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We support this initiative. I think making the permit required after you draw for the bear tag. Makes sense for hunters, makes their life easier as they prepare for the hunts, provides them flexibility in terms of whether they have to carry it electronically or physically. And then additionally for our law enforcement officers, that makes their jobs easy as well when they're in the field. So we do support this initiative. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'll bring it back to the RAC for discussion.
Darren, can you address the harvest statistics for the Book Cliffs, the San Juan? What was the other one the houndsmen were asking for? LaSalle's.
Do you want me to tell you what the harvest is doing there, or?
Yeah, like is the average age going down? Are they harvesting more females because they can't find males? Are they, how's the population
Look really
trend for
quick.
those?
Sorry, just a second. By the way, John, it's about 140 bait versus hounds, and then there's another little bit in the fall that could be either. So, but it's roughly the same in spring and summer. Yeah. Okay, let's see. So. If you take a 3-year average, so looking at LaSalle's, hold on a second. LaSalle's managed under the moderate strategy. And so if you take the last 3 years, just to kind of get an idea how it aligns with the plan. Just got to get the right tab. Sorry about this. LaSalle is at 32.9%. That's success. 39.5% adult males over 5, 41.8% females. San Juan, 36.2% adult males. That's a little low for what the objectives would be. 35% females, that'd be within objective. Then Book Cliffs. Bitter Creek South, we'll just use that. 30% adult males, a little low. That's and 35.8% females, which is within the parameters. So we'll have one more year when we come back with recommendations, and we'll look at those numbers again, and then we'll make recommendations according to the plan. So it'll depend on what management strategy those biologists choose. But again, we asked the board to do this in 3-year chunks, and so we'd ask that we continue to follow those.
Yeah, so there's nothing catastrophic there. There might be a slightly lower within the range, but nothing
Right.
really out of, okay.
Any other discussion? I'll add to that, Mike. Looking at least the San Juan and the LaSalle's, we lost 11% of our fawns to bears, so there seems to be some bears.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's
Well, you don't know 100% sure, but on all of our mortalities, when we swab the bite marks and send in the DNA to see if we are getting accurate estimates of mortality. But bears have a characteristic pattern of eating. They usually skin the animal, so you'll find the skin inside out and the body's gone. If it's a fawn, you'll just find an inside out skin there, whereas coyotes will tear them all apart and take everything and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think this all makes sense, taking the orientation course after you draw. I was lucky enough to have a tag this year. Went and watched it before the hunt. So I think it just makes sense if you just take it right before then. And the rest of it seems pretty sound to me as well.
Thank you. I guess I'll entertain a motion then.
If I may ask, just to be clear, what we're discussing. What we're discussing is specific portions of the management plan revision, correct?
So that rule change, that's correct.
And the orientation course.
And the orientation course, that's correct.
Okay. The other aspects of the bear management plan, this is the third year. So it'll
That's
stay-
correct, unless we wanted to make a different motion here. But, I mean, we could recommend, as the Houndsman Association said, to reduce tags if this RAC wanted to do that. But, so yes, any motion related to the plans on the table right now.
Got it. Well, I, for one, would be in favor of reducing the tag number in the regions that were brought up by the Houndsman.
So you could definitely make that motion and see if it passes.
I understand. This might just be a procedural effort, but I would make that motion to decrease the tax by 10% in the 3 regions mentioned by the Houndsman.
Okay, we have a motion to reduce the tags by 10% on the 3 units suggested by the Houndsman Association. Can we clarify those units for
There was 4.
4?
LaSalle, San Juan, Book Cliffs, and Boulder.
LaSalle, San Juan, Book Cliff, of Boulder.
Okay, revise the
Just
motion
a
to include.
quick-
all of it.
Permits are not an action item. So certainly you can make a recommendation to the,
Right,
but okay.
yeah. We could, all we're gonna do is recommend the board do it. We can't, I understand that's not an action item. Is there a second to that motion? Motion fails for lack of second. I'll entertain a different motion.
I'd move that we accept the proposal by the division as it's presented.
Second.
So we have a motion from Eric and a second from Jim to accept as presented. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor, raise their hand. 4, 5, 6, 7, and opposed, 7 to 1. And John, I'm assuming it's because you'd like to see that reduction, is that correct? Okay, thank you very much. We have that in the notes. The next action plan is the elk management unit plans. So I'll call up Daniel Salee. Do you have some additional information or a brief summary or anything you want to give to us, Daniel?
If you want, I can just summarize the changes for the central region.
That'd be great.
So there's 2 changes in the plans that affect the central region. The first one is the Central Mountains unit is being divided into 2 units, those being the Nebo and the Manti. And that was primarily driven by GPS data showing the elk don't often cross between those 2 parts of the Central Mountain unit. So we divided it to have more targeted management strategies. And the Nebo unit, we're recommending an increase in the population objective, increasing from 1,450 to 2,200, so a total increase of 750 elk on the Nebo unit.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Daniel. I'm sure everybody here watched the proposals of the other changes. Questions for Daniel from the RAC?
And Dan, I got a couple. One of them actually came from the public, from the comments, just the rationale from the general units. So with the Oak Creeks being part of the central region, and the other is the Beaver West. Is there an opportunity to split those out as a general management unit instead of being managed with the limited entry that's tied to it with the Pavant and the Beaver units?
Dax could answer that one a little better, sorry.
Defers to the boss on the first question.
I don't know if I totally understand the question. Repeat that for me.
Yeah, so if I can remember, the question came from a member of the public asking about where the Oak Creek and the Beaver West units are general units.
In any bowl.
Yeah, any bowl units, but they're managed with the limited entry plans? And would there be any appetite, I think is the way it was, of having them as their own separate management units so they're not managed under the same plan as a limited entry?
Yeah, we look at these populations, and some of the populations, none of them are perfect. None of them, have all the elk that always stay in the same places all the time. And we're moving and making some progress. We split the Nebo from the Manti. Some of these other, we have subunits within the units, and we're moving towards trying to manage separate, as best as we can tell, separate individual populations separately and individually. And those lines are blurry sometimes, and I don't think we're there perfectly on all the units either. We're trying to move in that direction as we get better data over the years. I think we can continue to refine that. At this point in time, we have subunit objectives and different bull strategies. We have different boundaries for the cow hunts. So we feel like we have the tools we need to be able to manage them appropriately for what we're trying to do on the different subunits there. It's a good question. I think we're comfortable with where we're at right now, but it's something that we'll continue to look at as we move forward.
Yeah, and I think part of this question too went up with, since I-15 is basically divided, and they're high fenced all the way along there too. They're basically their own population now. So that was, just want to make sure that's in
It's a
there.
good idea. We probably need to look at that one.
All right, and then a couple more. Underneath there, you've got the vegetation studies that you talked about. Who's conducting those, and to determine if there's changes are needed,
Yeah, you're talking about the Southern Region units where we're doing the ranges.
the splits, yeah.
Yeah. So as far as I understand, those are kind of in conjunction with the BLM and the Division of Wildlife, keeping an eye on things. So
Okay.
we'll both be participating in that. And there'd definitely be open discussion between the two agencies about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I think it's a good thing to have that in there with the range to do it. But then how can those be implemented in a timely fashion? So if you, like, knowing that there's a drought coming, when's the timing of those surveys done, vegetative studies to say, hey, we need to make a change? And then can they be implemented early enough? Because part of your presentation to talk about that it would be in conjunction or be similar to, cuts that the permittees or the rangers, range users are taking also.
Yeah, there will be a bit of a lag on that because, we have to have tags set up for the draw for the next year's hunting season. So there would be easily catch up in subsequent years. And if it's not an extended drought, we wouldn't necessarily need to drop the population if on a one-off, so.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Daniel? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, who came to the table to increase the Nebo elk population objective?
Well, the district biologist can answer that more specifically.
He likes to talk. So.
You know it. So the question as far as who was on the committee, we had Sportsman's RAC, we had a member from the RAC on it, we had Farm Bureau was on that, we had an elected official, CWMU Landowner Association. I feel like I'm forgetting someone, but that's kind of the gist of the committee.
And I mean, it's kind of for my curiosity a little bit, just like was the committee like unanimous in that, or was there some kind of hold back on it?
It was unanimous as part of these committee. That is the goal, is to go in to be unanimous on it. And there definitely was in this case.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Wes, any other questions for Daniel? Questions from the public? I'll turn the time over to Jason to report on the online comments.
All right, thanks, Brock. For this question, we had 6 respondents, 4 strongly agreed or 67%, 1 somewhat agreed, 17%, or there's 1 neutral, 17% also. The weighted average was 4.5. We had, I think, 4 comments from the public. One of them, thank you for your good work in growing our herds. It's great to see habitat work translate into higher objectives. More elk and herd management based on natural geographic boundaries is a good thing. There's adequate habitat on the units identified for increases in elk numbers. And then separating the Nebo and Manti is a great move, as is the South Slopes. And then also the comment that Eric alluded to, and maybe looking at some other units to separate and manage a little bit differently.
Thank you, Jason. Do we have any public comments? One public comment. Garrett, you're up again.
Garrett Slatkoff, supporting, or here representing Utah Chapter Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We support this initiative, support the biologist being able to manage the elk here with as much data as they have here. So that's obviously a good thing. And then also more elk equals more opportunity for the hunters. So we obviously support that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. I'll bring it back now to the RAC for discussion.
I've got another question probably for Dax about the South Slope. Or is that you?
Just ask it, we'll see.
Yeah, so that number is going to be reduced, the population objective is reduced by 2,000. We're not trying to reduce that elk herd by that. We're just not trying to count them on the reservation. Is that how I understand that?
It'll functionally result in probably an increase of 500 to 1,000 elk on that unit if we exclude tribal trust lands where we don't have management authority.
So
in our counts.
So what you're saying is you're reducing by 2,000, but there's 2,500 that live on the tribe.
Yeah, you know, the estimate, I think, on the Yellowstone unit, the old objective was 5,000. The new proposed objective is 3,500. There's probably 8,000 elk on the unit, and 5,000 of those are probably on tribal ground.
Okay, so I like that a lot. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
How big is the tribal ground on that unit relative to the non-tribal ground, out of curiosity?
I mean, it's probably, I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but it's probably a third of the unit.
Third of the unit.
Yeah, most of the winter range is Ute tribal trust land. Most of the land that would be BLM anywhere else belongs to the Ute tribe out there. So you kind of have high country, a little bit of Forest Service, a lot of wilderness. Then your wintering block is pretty much tribal trust lands. And below that is almost all entirely private.
Other discussion?
I'd move to approve as presented.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion from Mike to approve as presented, seconded by John. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And any opposed? It's unanimous. Which brings us, my goodness, 45 minutes in, the last agenda item. Oh, I'd also like to acknowledge that Paula, another Wildlife Board member, has joined this meeting. This is item number 7, poaching reporting reward permit rule revisions. Wyatt Bubak, you have any additional information or brief summaries you want to provide?
I can provide a quick summary. So basically this revision just recommends 4 relatively small changes. One deals with removal of the cougar permits within the rules, since that permitting system's been changed with recent legislation. Provides for additional protections of reporting parties, kind of addresses a loophole of when someone reports 2 or more eligible violations in a year, and then allows for some additional permits to be issued in the form of loosening the restrictions or standards in which you are eligible for a permit.
Questions from the RAC for Wyatt?
Yeah, two quick questions. One is, are you seeing anything regarding cougar? I know that HB 469 basically took that oversight away from DWR, but any field observations regarding what's going on with the cougars in relation to 469?
Yeah, no, I don't. As far as harvest numbers or anything in that regard, yeah, I'm not, probably wouldn't be the best person to speak to that.
Darren, you could probably come answer that question.
Yeah, I actually looked at this yesterday, John. So I took last year's time period between May, which is when the legislation kicked in, compared it to this year. Last year we'd seen 85 lions killed. This year it's 75, so it's actually lower. We did see a few more show up. You know, the new trapping regulation, about 8 of those were taken in leg hold traps. The rest were either spot and stock during the big game seasons, and then there were some taken with hounds. Most were taken with the use of dogs.
Thanks for that, Darren. And then last question, I don't mean to bore everyone else, but for my own benefit, while I've got you, can you, in 30 seconds, describe the difference between unlawful take and wanton destruction?
Yeah, so unlawful take deals with, it can involve accidental, it has a lower mental state required to meet unlawful take. So wanton destruction, you have to have prerequisite violations, a violation of unlawful take, knowing intentional or reckless conduct, as well as something has to be captured, injured, or destroyed. Where unlawful take, you don't technically have to even kill something to meet unlawful take, but as it is used in this rule, basically the standard in which we want to enforce wanton destruction is those people that are intentionally or knowingly out there abusing the resources, where unlawful take could, in theory, be, or in actuality, be someone that was just not as careful as they should have been, but their intent wasn't necessarily to be out there abusing the resource. So wanton destruction in our eyes it holds potential felony charges. It's a much more severe violation. Yep.
How many poaching reward permits a year does the division give out?
So in the last 5 years, we've been anywhere between 0 and 11. So it's not substantial. And they are issued on top of or in addition to the units or the permits in a given unit. So they don't come out of the public draw.
Yeah. Well, I would just, that's always a pet peeve of mine. If that animal's there to be hunted and harvested, then that's coming out of the pool of that's probably a comment, so I'll back up.
Thank you.
That's a pet peeve of mine. There's only a finite number of animals that we can hunt. So is there a possibility that if a person can change the unit that the poaching reward permit was obtained through to a different unit, is there a possibility that we can overburden that other unit with tags? So say somebody catches, there's multiple people that are caught on, limited entry, premium limited entry deer units. And they all want to choose, and there's like 3 or 4 or 5 that want to choose the Oak Creeks in 1 year. That feels like, is there a way that can be regulated?
Yeah, so that generally is regulated in the rule, and kind of how they do that is a permit has to have, a unit has to have 10 public draw permits the following year to even be eligible for a reward permit. And so if a unit doesn't have 10 permits in it, then there's a system in this rule that outlines how you go to the next closest unit. And if that doesn't meet standards that are allowed, then you can go to a different species or another like unit, for example. So let's say your Oak Creek example, let's say there's 2 or 3 violations that would qualify for a permit on that unit. Also in the rule, it says if the reward permit allocations exceed 10% of what the public draw units are, then those aren't eligible units at that point. So there's kind of fail-safe set up in the rule that would prevent a given unit, specifically a unit that doesn't have a lot of public draw tags, to be overwhelmed by this reward.
Okay, thank you for summarizing that, because I didn't have to read the rule.
Yeah, so
That's what I'm here for. Well, and I have one question as well. I got a couple emails from people saying, I've reported, I've never got anything. Does that mean the person wasn't prosecuted? What does that mean?
Yeah, so in order to be eligible for this, you have to meet a couple different standards in the rule. And so one of them is basically you report something that we use the information and make a case on. And I'll go into what making a case or successful prosecution is in the rule. You have to help us throughout the entire process, and then the person has to be successfully prosecuted. So successfully prosecuted in rule is defined as the individual receives a citation for wanton destruction, or we file charges for wanton destructions, and the county attorney actually files the charges. But basically what that means is we investigate a case, we turn the case over to a county attorney, and the county attorney chooses to file charges for wanton destruction. So those 2 things would be eligible as successful prosecution. But filing charges is different than conviction. Filing charges is basically the county attorney feels that there's enough information there to pursue conviction. So you don't have to be convicted to be eligible don't have to have a conviction to be eligible for a reward permit, but it does have to have filing of charges for wanton destruction or issuance of a citation for wanton destruction. And then the addition in this rule for consideration here is the filing of charges or citation for unlawful take of a trophy animal as well. So potential reasons for that is charges were never filed, or the information that you provided didn't lead to us necessarily getting that conviction. So for example, we've had a couple instances where people report a general, like let's say a hunter orange violation. And then through that investigation, we identify a wanton destruction charge or potentially an unlawful take charge. We then have to decide, was the information provided what resulted in that conviction, or is that just, was the conviction a kind of a side effect of the original report? So there's a number of reasons, but you have to meet that standard. It has to be charged or excuse me, convicted of wanton destruction or unlawful take of a trophy.
So if, thank you for that explanation. If you guys want destruction, but the county attorney says, I'm only going to do unlawful take, they're still eligible or not?
They would be if it was a trophy animal, if this rule gets approved.
That brings up the other question. So that actually lowers the bar on who can qualify for these permits, correct?
So the addition of, we have quite a few unlawful take violations. We really try to reserve the wanton destruction for like those individuals who are truly trying to abuse a resource. So the addition of the unlawful take fairly drastically in most circumstances would increase the allowances for people to qualify for these permits.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the things that gives me a little heartburn with that, because like, for example, if somebody's on a spike hunt and they shoot a 3x3 bull,
they would not qualify.
They would not, because it doesn't meet a trophy
It has
standard.
to be a 6 point on one side to qualify. And so that's a good point to bring up, because that was one of the items that we discussed when we went through this. So a quick history, if I may, on this rule. Originally, it didn't have general season allocations. It didn't have cougar bear. It didn't have turkey. And when I say general season, I mean general season big game. But through revisions of this rule, those allowances have kind of expanded because it seemed appropriate to allow for those expansions. But when this was originally written, generally speaking, it was like wanton destruction only and fairly limited or completely limited to more like limited entry units. And so now that we have spike hunts, that discussion came up, and why we went with the trophy status is because if someone poaches a spike or shoots a 2-point bull, does that necessarily justify a trophy bull tag on a 23-point unit, let's say, or 30-point unit? So that's one of the reasons we stuck with the limited status, is because this rule does allow for, if you have general season hunts and limited entry hunts on the same unit, that person can then qualify for the limited entry hunt if they meet the standards of that rule. So the examples where that would occur were some of these general season deer units that have like a late season muzzleloader or a hams hunt on it. We were okay with that because you're essentially hunting the same deer. You're not hunting a trophy deer or a trophy during the late season necessarily that you can also hunt during the general season. So we're comfortable with that transition, but had a little bit of pause with an accidental harvest of a 2-point bull elk qualifying for a trophy bull elk on the same unit. Did that answer your question? Awesome, thanks.
Other questions for Wyatt? Any questions from the public? I'll turn the time over to Jason to report on online comments.
Thanks, Brock. We had 4 votes for this question. 3 strongly agreed for 75%, and 1 was neutral for 25%. We had 1 comment that said, this is a very good thing.
Are there any public comments? Garrett again.
Garrett Slatkoff, representing Utah Chapter Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We do support this initiative. We think it's important that hunters feel safe and comfortable policing themselves and reporting things they see in the field and went wrong. So we do think that this does provide them that safety and comfortability that they feel necessary to do so, as well as rewarding them accurately. When we were discussing this, we did share some of the similar concerns about issuing some of these tags, premium entry and once in a lifetime, and whether any bad actors might try and somehow game the system on this, or whether there would be any particularly negative impacts to herds based off of how many of these permits might get rewarded. However, after kind of looking at some of the data and looking at the rule further, we do trust the law enforcement and our biologists to kind of manage that accordingly, and are on board and support this initiative. So thank you.
Thank you, Garrett. I'll bring it back to the RAC for discussion. I'll also acknowledge that Amos Murphy, a RAC member, has joined the meeting online.
So I think that the poach and reward permits are a good tool. I'm a little bit hesitant, just because we're making it easier. There's a finite pool of the resource to actually hunt, and those animals, they come out of the public's ability to hunt. And so I think it'd be good to if this passes, to like say, let's look at it in 3 years and see what the real effects are. I mean, if we start to double, triple permits, I mean, that's a good thing, because we're getting people, prosecuted. But there might be other ways to reward that. So I don't know. That's just kind of the way I feel about it.
Do you have a
Mind
comment?
if I just add one more? So we do have the monetary aspect of this as well, and we govern that mostly by internal policies, which does a good job there too. So if they, that's eligible for anybody that reports a wildlife crime, regardless of the severity. And we oftentimes do have people that qualify for permits but decline it, whether they're just non-hunters or non-consumptive users, and we defer to that monetary reward aspect as well.
What's the average monetary reward?
So generally in policy, we say about 75% of the restitution value is what we'd recommend. So let's say you have a $100 swan, you'd be eligible. We'd recommend a $75 reward. That can go up to and can be approved past $1,000. Just requires a director's office approval if we go above $1,000. So I want to say we issue anywhere from, I should have this data, I looked at it not too long ago, $8,000 to $20,000 in monetary rewards annually. So we do use that regularly.
Josh?
Yeah, the portion of this I like the most is protecting the anonymity of the reporter. I think that's important, especially when you talk about the safety of the reporter. It's often like a disgruntled family member and things like that. And so I think the switching units portion is great, because that, the hunting community talks, and having that option is great. I share Mike's concern about the multiple rewards. It might have been last year or the year before this issue came up, and one of the conservation officers called people who report multiple tips sort of watchers, and they're on the landscape enough. They already have the option of receiving 2 very highly coveted tags under the current rule. And so to take that sidebar off, I do worry that you're rewarding, again, it's a small number, but in a pool of limited resources on premium units, you're rewarding somebody with what many people wait a lifetime for, in many cases, multiple times a year. I don't know. It just has the potential of backfiring, I think, against what we're trying to encourage, which is reporting and things like that. So I do struggle with this one as well.
I guess I'm not that concerned about it myself. I mean, they've been up to 11, and even if somebody gets 2, I say more power to them. Report those suckers. So usually if you're going to get 2, that means you're reporting a family member. You're not going to report a family member unless there's something good out there.
Yeah, and for me, I'm not that concerned about the number per person. The transferability, as long as it's, within the family, I'm fine with that. I just worry that if that number goes from 11 to 35 or to 40, and which sounds great, except if they can transfer that opportunity into a different unit, and I know that there's only, up to 10% and there's caps on it, but I don't know, that's the only thing. And it doesn't concern me enough to not vote for it, but I think it's something that I would like the division to watch, so.
We could just recommend that there's an annual accounting, maybe there already is, but an annual accounting of what's happened.
That wouldn't be hard for us to come up with those numbers at whatever request we needed.
If there's no other discussion, I'd make the motion that we approve as presented with the asking the division to present the data associated with these permits yearly to the Wildlife Board.
With the provision that we asked the board to recommend that the division.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that we ask the board. We don't want to tell the board what to do.
I would second that.
Motion, is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Mike, a second by John, that we recommend, that we approve as presented with the addition of recommending that the board ask the division to give an annual accounting. Any discussion on that motion? All those in favor? Braden?
Aye.
Amos?
Aye.
That passes unanimously. And with that,
I've got one quick question, Mr. Chair, maybe it's for Jason.
yeah, if you have a question.
Being the representative from the Division of Wildlife, is there a way in the future that we could have maybe one or two of those agenda items from the last RAC moved to this RAC, especially considering that our draw date has been moved back and we've got, I love getting out of here when we are, but
I think that is a great, we have 2 board members listening to this right now. And I think that that's a great idea, and that we don't get out at 7 tonight and at midnight last time. So I had one comment, since we have 2 board members, because I was looking at the rules, and the new rule on scope says a 1 power or a red dot, and red dots come into up to 10 power scope. So I don't know if that was the intent of that finding. So that's what the motion says, 1 power or red dot, and they might have a different intent. I just wanted to bring it to their attention. Anything else? Then meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.